Hello and welcome to the next video in the Claude Cowork for Beginners Make Easy course. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about how you can write the best prompts, the best task instructions, so that Cowork knows what you need and is going to get you the output in the quality and in the time frame and in the structure that you really want and need, right? So just like when you use ChatGPT or Claude, you should know a few basics about prompting so that you get what you want. That is even more the case if you have more complex workflows or tasks that you want to hand to your virtual employee, right? That's why you need the core framework. The core framework stands for context, outcome, requirements, and examples, right? So you should keep those four in mind when you write your task description or your prompt, however you want to call it, right? Context is what's the situation, right? So what are you working on, right? If I just tell Claude Cowork to order files in a folder, then I don't need to give much context, right? But if I wanted to research a specific industry for me and write me an industry report as a draft, or if I want even a book draft or a presentation and a few slide decks on a certain topic, then the context needs to be much wider and you need to explain the context in more detail, right? So that it knows who is doing what, to what end, what is this going to be used for, right? Who's the target group? All of those things could become relevant. That is context. The outcome is, of course, what you want to happen, right? Which also goes into what should happen at the end of this task, right? Should a certain task be completed online? Should certain things be submitted? Should certain documents be created? Should certain insights be derived? What do you want to happen at the end of this task? Requirements, right? So how should Claude Cowork go about this task? What requirements does it need to keep in mind? That could once again be the structure of the output. It could be the target group of an output. It could be things that should not be researched or included. And maybe the length of the output. Those are some of the requirements that you should keep in mind, right? Or maybe the file types that you want to be created, or maybe you want the output if it's a number of files in a certain structure. All of those things would be requirements. And then examples, that is a great prompting technique. Like if you give it examples of the kind of output it should create, for example, or the kind of tone and style that it should use. Or again, depending on the task, of course, it will depend what examples you're going to use. But if you can give it examples of how you want things to be done, then of course it will have a much easier job to give it to you the way you want and need it. Each element guides Claude toward the exact outcome you need, right? So try to have all of these four in place if it's a more complex task. So a very simple rule is, of course, vague versus specific. If we keep the example in mind of organizing files, you could just give it access to a folder and say, organize my files, right? Now, you will get an outcome, but probably not the one you want. So that prompt is too vague. It has an unclear outcome. It has no criteria. And there's a high risk that it takes wrong action, right? And that's particularly bad if it may even delete files or if it renames files, right? It will maybe make some changes that can take a lot of time to undo. So you don't want to do that, right? Plus, you shouldn't hand a task to Claude Cowork if you have no idea what you're looking for, right? Don't just hand a task to Cowork to feel like you've outsourced something or you feel productive, right? I will say I've done this at times, and I know other people who have done it, and the first time you have your virtual employee, it just feels awesome to watch it do things, right? But only hand it tasks that you have clearly instructed, otherwise there's no benefit to it. There's probably even a downside because it might just do things that will cost you time to fix. How could we turn it around? Let's look at the core framework. My downloads folder has 200 plus files, create subfolders by category, move files, create a summary document, right? Now, it could be much longer than this yet, and it could also ask for a plan that you need to approve. But this is already much better. You're giving it a context, right? You're saying this is my downloads folder. You want to categorize them into subfolders and then move the files. And you want to have a summary document to look over, right? And we did something similar in earlier videos. So this is already much better. But once again, it could be much longer than this yet. So what is the sweet spot, right? You need to be specific about outcomes, but you can be flexible about the execution, right? That's maybe a very important rule that you need to keep in mind. Now, well, also, of course, because Claude Cowork with Opus and Sonnet models is so smart that often it knows the best way to reach that outcome by itself, right? And many times it might know a better way to go about it than you have done yourself previously, right? So maybe you have a specific process and you could teach Claude Cowork that process, and we'll be looking at that in skills, but you can just let Claude Cowork figure out the process itself in many ways, right? You could always also ask it to just describe to you how it would go about it. You look at the plan and then you prove it if it works for you. But you need to be specific about the outcomes, of course, right? You need to say, what do you want it to do for you? So the sweet spot would be you should say what you want and why. So that's outcome and context. Describe the result, not every step, right? That's kind of the outcome and requirements, and give examples when criteria are complex, right? So again, if you have a very simple task, you probably don't need samples, but if you have a complex task, you want to give examples so that it can really do it the way that you want and need it. What you shouldn't do is don't micromanage the process. Yeah, like what's the point? I mean, you want to win time, right? That's why you're using Cowork. Don't specify exactly maybe commands for the command line interface if you're more in programming tasks or folder paths, right? Like you don't need to do that. You don't need to tell it where the files are because chances are if you have put all of them in the project directory, it will recognize where things are. But you should also not assume that Claude knows your entire folder structure, right? So there's a sweet spot there, and the best way to think about it is maybe if you have a new employee, an intern who has been there for a few days, you still need to give them a good amount of instructions, right? And maybe also tell it about the folder structure. But you also don't need to micromanage it, and you don't need to tell it all about that. Like it will be able to derive from the context, right? And it also just depends on if you have given the right amount of context beforehand, it will also be better able to think about those smaller aspects of it. So, quick reference. Context, who are you? What's the situation? Outcome, what specifically do you want in this task? Requirements, what rules must be followed? And examples, what does good look like? Or what is a good folder structure? What is a good research report? What is a good email draft to my subscribers? All those things, think about them first and then give the instruction. Now, there's another thing that you can do, which is that you can build your prompt library, right? So you will, in the beginning, you will probably and hopefully be experimenting a lot. You will be writing task instructions for all kinds of repetitive tasks that you so far had to do yourself. And then you will see what works and what doesn't. You will run into errors. You will have it do things that you didn't want. Or sometimes you will just be impressed how good it is at reading your thoughts and maybe doing things different than you did, but way more effectively and better. So you will be experimenting, and based on that, save what works. So keep successful prompts in a text file, right? I used a Notes app on my MacBook, but you can use any other file, maybe Notion, whatever. Track what tasks worked well and why. You can also just ask it to explain itself after it has done that and get some learnings from that. That can also be interesting, of course. Note patterns that get great results. Over time, right, you will have a number of working prompts. You can adjust and improve. And generally, over time, you will build your library, right? Depending on how much you use Cowork, that can take weeks, months, but you get better day by day by day, right? So important here is, I think, to be experimenting, to be curious, to be, in a way, playful, of course, without putting your sensitive data at risk. But it's it's really exciting, right? I had an exciting time playing with Cowork when I got started to just see how it can do things for you that took hours and a few minutes, but also maybe what you didn't consider in the prompt and how maybe it goes off track. So it's just exciting. And again, if you keep what we talked about with security also in mind. Right, that's it. And in the next video, we're going to talk about professional documents, how you can create them, edit them, and much more.